We're going to finish up the last of the gram-negative bacteria that we're going to cover in this video. The last of the gram-negative bacteria that we're going to look at are actually not in this proteobacteria group that we were just looking at. So anything that's not in the proteobacteria group in the gram-negatives, they just call them non-proteobacteria. So we're just going to take a look at three of them. We've got Cyanobacteria, Chlamydia, and Spirochetes. We're going to start with the Cyanobacteria. Remember that they are photosynthetic. They're kind of a blue-green color, so you can see them down here on the bottom left. And the reason that they're blue-green is that because they have a photosynthetic pigment that they're using to capture the light to do photosynthesis. But they do not have any chloroplasts because they're prokaryotes and they do not have any organelles. And in the process of doing photosynthesis, they produce oxygen as a waste product, which is obviously something that we need. And cyanobacteria evolved probably around 3.5 billion years ago, and they really changed the Earth's atmosphere when they did evolve. And on the bottom right, there's a link to an animation that explains how the cyanobacteria changed the Earth's atmosphere when they did evolve, because Earth's atmosphere originally did not have very much oxygen in it. So it's kind of a interesting video if you want to check that out. The problem with these cyanobacteria is they can make you sick. So in the summer when it's warm and in lakes where there's a lot of runoff from farms that are using a lot of fertilizer, the cyanobacteria can overgrow. So we do have a problem with that in some of the lakes around Utah, and you'll hear that on the news. So here's a picture on the bottom of Utah Lake with a bloom of cyanobacteria. So you can see that there's lots of cyanobacteria growing in the water and it's all green from them. And the problem is that the cyanobacteria can produce toxins. And if you go swimming in the water or drink the water, those toxins can cause some skin irritation, and then if you ingest the toxins, it can cause some GI upset, vomiting and diarrhea, and can even damage your liver, cause liver failure, neurologic signs, and if you ingest enough of the toxin, it can actually kill you. So that's why they tell you to not swim in the water and keep your pets out of the water as well. So you'll probably hear on the news where they call them algae blooms or blue-green algae. It's just a very old name that they used to call cyanobacteria, but it's not correct, because remember that cyanobacteria are bacteria and they're not algae, because remember algae are eukaryotic microorganisms. Next we have Chlamydia trachomatis. This is a bacteria that's an obligate intracellular parasite. And remember, obligate means required. So they're required to live inside of our cells, so they don't live for very long outside of our cells. And they're parasites, meaning that they will benefit and our cells will be harmed. There are some different serovars or strains of Chlamydia trachomatis. Some of them are sexually transmitted, or STDs. So you can see on the bottom left picture, we're looking at a cervix, and all this white stuff is pus caused by the infection from Chlamydia trachomatis. And then we do have some of the serovars or strains of Chlamydia trachomatis that can infect a person's eye, and that will cause a trachoma. So what happens is the bacteria will infect the conjunctiva, the inner lining of the eyelids, and that will actually cause some scarring. And if the inner lining of the eyelids will scar, that causes the eyelashes to roll in, and then they end up scratching the cornea of the eye, and that will cause scarring. and then the cornea turns cloudy, and then that results in blindness. So the Chlamydia trachomatis has a pretty unique life cycle, so let's take a look at that. So this is pretty different from other bacteria. So chlamydia, remember, doesn't survive very long outside of cells. So in order to infect another cell, they've got to go outside, and to survive, they form these elementary bodies, these little purple things. So that's what's infectious. And then they will infect the next cell, enter, and then once they get inside, they will turn into these reticulate bodies. And you don't need to know that name. The reticulate bodies are what are going to divide, form new bacterial cells, and then the reticulate bodies will then turn into the elementary bodies and then be released from that cell and then go find another cell to infect. So it's a pretty different life cycle from other bacteria. The last of the gram-negative non-proteome bacteria are the spirochetes. So they have a spiral shape, and how we tell them apart from the spirilla is that they're thinner and also flexible. So when they move, they can bend. They do have flagella, one on each end of the cell, and they're going to be wrapped around the body of the bacterial cell, so they end up being called axial filaments. They don't stick outside the cell at all. They're actually in the periplasmic space in between the outer membrane and the cell wall. There are 3 different spirochetes that cause human disease, so make sure you know these for the exam. So we've got Treponema pallidum, which causes syphilis, one of the STDs. And we have Borrelia burgdorferi, which causes Lyme disease, and that's spread by tick bites. We have a few cases of Lyme disease here in Utah, but we don't have a lot just because we don't have a lot of ticks here. But other places in the country like New England, Upper Midwest, they have a lot of Lyme disease there because they have a lot of ticks. And then Leptospira causes leptospirosis. And depending on the species of leptospirosis you get infected with, it could cause kidney failure, liver failure, or even meningitis. This bacteria is shed in the urine of infected animals, and you can get this by coming into contact with the infected urine or with water that's been contaminated with infected urine. And the bacteria will enter either through your mucous membranes or through a cut. We don't see a lot of leptospirosis here in Utah because we're so dry, but there is a link here to an article that we did have a leptospirosis outbreak in 13 dogs down in St. George at a boarding kennel. So there was a dog that came in from Arizona that had leptospirosis. It was shedding the bacteria in its urine, and it infected 13 of the dogs in the boarding kennel. So luckily, though, the bacteria did not spread to any people. And then over here on the bottom left, to look at spirochetes if you want to see them swimming around, the microscope we commonly use to look at the bacteria would be the dark field microscope, because you can see there's a dark background and then you've got the bright or light specimen. And so that really increases the contrast without having to stain the bacteria, which staining would kill them and you wouldn't be able to see what they're doing.